The evidence, because a prosecutor can't just accuse people. You have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that you can go into court and make stick. So after looking at the complaints, I had one possible case, and then after looking, and I actually in consulting with the FBI and the Justice Department's election fraud unit, we all concluded this case was not provable, so I didn't file any cases. Well, I later heard through the 05 and early 06 that the New Mexico Republicans were just furious that I hadn't filed any cases. Of course, they didn't have the evidence that I looked at. They didn't talk to the agent. They didn't look at the reports. So they thought I was being incompetent, or I was waiting until after the election cycle, which is when Heather Wilson called me. Heather Wilson is the congresswoman from Albuquerque. She called me in October wanting to know about sealed indictments. And I remember thinking, I can't talk about sealed indictments. So I didn't tell her anything about that. About 2 weeks later, Senator Pete Domenici, the guy who helped me get my job as U.S. Attorney, called me and was a lot more pointed. He ended up hanging up on me after he was trying to press me to tell him when these indictments related to a corruption matter was going to be prosecuted.
Explain again, Congressman Heather Wilson calling you.
Yeah, she had heard, Heather Wilson had heard that, and I heard this on a debate on television in New Mexico just about 2 weeks ago. She stated she'd heard from constituents that I was intentionally withholding the indictment of a prominent Democrat until after the election. This is information that she could have used in an attack piece against her opponent, who'd been the state attorney general. And she had previously attacked her opponent for not filing any corruption cases. So this information was highly sensitive. It was highly confidential. I could not disclose it. And Heather wanted me to tell her about sealed indictments, which is absolutely prohibited. I mean, I could have lost my job for cause over this. So I'm convinced she picked up the phone, called Domenici, who called me a couple of weeks later in my home on a weekend and tried to get me to he tried to pressure me to rush these indictments, which I didn't do because the case wasn't ready.
I want you to tell that specific story that you also told before Congress when Senator Domenici made that call to you when you were sitting in your bedroom. David Iglesias is the former U.S. Attorney for New Mexico. He was fired along with a number of other U.S. attorneys around the country. Scandal that has now rocked the Bush administration. We'll come back to that story in a minute. Patti Smith singing People Have the Power here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Our guest is the former U.S. Attorney for New Mexico, David Iglesias. We are talking about his new book, Injustice, Inside the Scandal That Rocked the Bush Administration. Go back to that day when Senator Domenici called you.
Yes, I had never received any call from any member of Congress at home while I was a sitting U.S. attorney. So it completely set me back on my heels. Fortunately, my wife was standing just about 5 feet away, so she was able to hear my side of the conversation. She was later interviewed by some investigations that are currently ongoing. That's one thing I want to make clear, Amy. There's still 5 pending investigations into this matter. It's not over. It's not resolved. But I was at home, and I get a call out of the blue from Steve Bell, who is Domeniche's chief of staff. He indicated to me there were complaints about me, and then he passed the phone over to Senator Pete Domeniche, who just got right down to brass tacks. No, how are you doing? How's the family? Nothing like that. It was, what he said was, I've been hearing about these corruption cases or corruption matters, and I want to know, are these going to get filed before November? And I said I didn't think so, which is about as much as I could say without getting into trouble myself. And then he said, I'm very sorry to hear that, and then he hung up on me. The line went dead. And then I looked at my wife, and it was one of those moments where you'll never forget, knowing something really bad has happened, but we weren't sure what the repercussions were. So those are the 2 phone calls, and which I believe led to my removal, that I didn't rush indictments against a prominent Democrat, and I didn't file any bogus voter fraud cases. You'll have to understand the Justice Department had sent out emails to every U.S. attorney, both in 2002 and 2004, asking us to work with election officials and enforce election law. I thought that was the MO for the Justice Department long term. Later found out that was a Bush administration thing.
I want to turn to the testimony of then Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez. On April 20th, 2007, Gonzalez appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee in the continued probe into the attorney firings, including yours. In more than 5 hours of testimony, Gonzalez claimed more than 50 times that he could not recall certain events, including the conversation with President Bush. In his opening testimony, Gonzalez apologized for the handling of the firings, but said they were justified.
Finally, let me be clear about this. While the process that led to the resignations was flawed, I firmly believe that nothing improper occurred. U.S. attorneys serve at the pleasure of the President. There's nothing improper in making a change for poor management, policy differences, or questionable judgment, or simply to have another qualified individual serve. I think we agree on that. I think we also agree on what would be improper. It would be improper to remove a U.S. attorney to interfere with or influence a particular prosecution for partisan political gain. I did not do that. I would never do that. Nor do I believe that anyone else in the department advocated the removal of a U.S. attorney for such a purpose.
Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy.
At home, this was...
Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont was one of Gonzalez's harshest congressional critics. In his opening remarks that day, Leahy suggested Gonzalez had engaged in misconduct.
One thing abundantly clear is that the phrase performance-related is to retain any meaning. That rationale should be withdrawn as a justification for the firing of David Iglesias, John McKay, Daniel Bogdan, Paul Charlton, Carl Lamb, and perhaps others. Indeed, the apparent reason for these terminations has a lot more to do with politics than performance. In his written testimony for this hearing and his newspaper columns, the Attorney General makes the conclusory statement that nothing improper occurred. The truth is that these firings haven't been explained, and there is mounting evidence of improper considerations and actions resulting in the dismissals.
David Iglesias, your response to what Gonzalez had to say.
Well, and that's precisely why Gonzalez has retained criminal counsel, is he realizes he's at jeopardy for being possibly investigated on obstruction of justice, perjury charges. And John McKay, in a law review piece in the Seattle Law Review Journal, just argued that precise point, that what Gonzalez did could amount to obstruction of justice. I agree with what Leahy said. The department still has not explained our firings. Nobody knows who put our names on the list. And to put this in the context, Amy, no president, no administration has ever fired 9 of their own U.S. attorneys for any reason. I mean, this is unprecedented. A lot of people point to what President Clinton did, but he was firing President H.W. Bush's U.S. attorneys, which is completely appropriate. Reagan fired his predecessors. Nothing wrong with that. But no sitting U.S. president has ever fired that many U.S. attorneys at the same time and offered up flimsy reasons like were proffered for us.
I wanted to go to this issue of voter turnout. We all keep talking about they wanted you to more aggressively investigate, quote, voter fraud.